Terry and Carl Proving wanted a quieter life for their daughters, with less exposure to violence and more safety on the streets. That's how in September of 1990, they left Arcadia, a city located near Los Angeles, this in California in the United States, and moved to a peaceful rural town called Meyer, this south of Lake Tahoe. In that peaceful environment, they believed they were going to find happiness. On the other hand, it was the ideal time of the year to do it, because Jaycee, who was 10 years old, would start 5th grade there. However, the tranquility lasted 9 months, and the journey turned into a nightmare. In today's video, I'm going to tell you the story of Jaycee, a girl who was kidnapped for 18 years. Jaycee Lee Dugard was born on May 3, 1980, and was the biological daughter of Terry's previous partner, Ken Slayton, from whom she separated in 1979. After a very brief relationship, Terry never told Ken that she was pregnant. Jaycee grew up being very shy and attached to her mother. She had a big smile and an angelic face full of freckles framed by golden blonde hair. After a while, Terry married Carl Proving, with whom she had another daughter, Shayna, in 1990. Terry wed Carl Proving on June 10, 1970, and they had a daughter, Shayna, in 1990. In 1991, Terry Dugard, who worked at a printing press, left early and in a hurry. She was running late and forgot to give her eldest daughter the classic morning kiss. Jaycee left a little later. She had to walk to where the school bus picked her up. She was wearing her favorite outfit in shades of pink. She closed the door and began to walk uphill against the traffic, as she had been taught for safety. Her perfect childish world would vanish in a couple of seconds. A gray car with a couple inside slowed down and approached her. She thought they were lost and wanted to ask her for directions. So she approached the window, and the man rolled down the glass, and when Jaycee was close enough, he quickly reached out his hand through the window and shot her with a stun gun. The electric shock knocked her out. It left her stunned. Jaycee staggered towards some pines and fell onto the pine cones. She didn't understand what was happening at that moment, and even ended up peeing herself. She wet herself. The last thing she remembers is that one of those had embedded itself against her body. The couple quickly put her in the back seat of the car, and the woman stayed behind to keep her on the floor. The man positioned himself at the wheel and they sped off. The man took the wheel and they quickly left. Carl Proving, watching Jaycee from the garage window, saw it all. From a distance, he saw two people in a mid-sized car, possibly a Mercury Monarch. It all happened very close to the bus stop and in front of the astonished gaze of other kids. Carl didn't think twice, and at that moment he got on his bike and tried to chase the car. He pedaled hard, but obviously he couldn't catch up. Despite the fact that the scene had been witnessed by several of Jaycee's colleagues, that the police had the car model and knew in detail the clothes the victim was wearing, they were empty-handed. They didn't even know where to start. Posters with the little girl's face were printed, and the city was filled with pink ribbons, Jaycee's favorite color. However, the case seemed to be slowly coming to an end. They had no idea that the real culprit was just over 2 hours away, and had a significant criminal record for abuse and kidnapping. With that, let's now move on to this pair of criminals. But we start with Philip Gregg Garrido. In '72, when he was only 21 years old, he abused a 14-year-old girl. He was lucky that the minor, very scared, did not want to testify in the trial, and he ended up acquitted. The following year, Garrido married Christine Murphy, a friend from college. It all ended when she accused him of mistreating her, and the woman recounted that when she proposed divorce, he chose to keep her kidnapped. His assaults continued, and in '76, he was arrested for the theft and abuse of Catherine Calloway, a 25-year-old girl who stopped to pick him up when he asked for a ride. In '76, the court ordered his psychiatric evaluation, and he was diagnosed with deviant sexual behavior and substance addiction. In '77 then, he was found guilty and sent to Kansas prison. His sentence was 50 years, but he would serve less than a quarter of the sentence. In this place, in jail, he met Nancy Bocanegra, who was the niece of another convict. During one of Nancy's visits to her uncle, they ended up flirting and becoming boyfriend and girlfriend. They got married on October 5th, 1981 in the same prison. And this is where an aberrant relationship, an aberrant couple begins. Jan 22nd, 1988. Philip Garrido was granted parole much earlier than he should have been and was allowed to live in his mother's house, who was suffering from senile dementia. He settled in the San Francisco area. Supposedly he was monitored with a GPS ankle bracelet, and officers had to come by to check on him periodically. That early release and lack of checks were directly responsible for what happened to Jaycee. You're about to find out why. When the kidnapping took place, no detective put Philip and Nancy on their radar. Despite the car, the witness descriptions, and the fact that the convict had a dense legacy of men who like minors, on one hand, Philip Garrido was addicted to methamphetamines and a religious fanatic who suffered from delusions. He claimed to be the chosen one, to hear the voices of gods and demons in the world, and proclaimed that he would save the planet. Some of those characteristics were known by the prison psychiatrists who had medicated him, but they still let him go free. Nancy also clearly had her perversions and only wanted to satisfy her husband. He was her lover. Apart from being his accomplice, she helped him approach the victims. For example, they would go to parks where Philip supposedly played the guitar and Nancy pretended to film him. But what they were actually doing was recording the minors in the area for him to delight in later. According to the psychiatrists who participated in the investigation, Jaycee would have been a gift from Nancy to her husband. On the day of the theft, it was she who kept the girl subdued on the car floor. The car journey to the home of Philip Garrido, who was 40 years old at the time, in Antioch 240 kilometers away, lasted almost 3 hours. When they arrived at the place, Garrido made her get out and walk. Jaycee felt the grass under her feet. Garrido threw a blanket over her head, this so that no one would see her, and once inside, she was forced to undress. Jaycee managed to hide a butterfly-shaped ring that she kept with her for the 18 years of her captivity. Philip asked her if she had ever seen a man without clothes and showed her his penis. Thus, with the little victim handcuffed, the abuses would begin. At first, he told her it would be quick and it would be better if she didn't resist, otherwise things were going to get aggressive. Philip warned her not to scream and that escaping would be useless because outside, there were several very fierce Doberman dogs that would attack her if she tried. Jaycee was confined in a soundproof space in the Garrido's backyard, where there were sheds, containers, and a couple of tents. She was handcuffed for the entire first week. Philip Garrido, her only contact, moved her days later to a room with a bed and handcuffed her to the bars of the headboard. Then, he brought her a television, but she could only watch the QVC channel, which didn't broadcast news. Given her age, Jaycee didn't know what abuse was. She had never heard of the topic before. However, now her life had turned into that and apologies. It was her new and horrifying existence. And she had no idea how long this hell would turn out to be. Jaycee was plunged into deep confusion to the point that at one moment she began to think that no one remembered her, and that her family had stopped looking for her. That thought distressed her in a terrible way. Sometime later, Garrido moved her to a larger space. He told her that demons and angels allowed him to have her, and that she had to help him with his problems because society had ignored him. He explained to her that if she did this, he wouldn't have to look for another girl. Jaycee was thus saving those unknown young women. Today, the woman is convinced that in some way it really was like that. Garrido also took amphetamines and forced Jaycee to take amphetamines. Jaycee to put on makeup and dress like a night worker. In the same way, she was a slave. He also forced her to look at adult magazines and movies, and asked her to listen to the voices that, he said, came out of the walls. The scenario was, as I tell you, maddening. For a girl who was only 11 years old, and who had been protected by her family until the day of the theft. Jaycee. Incarcerated, she consumed TV. On the show Who's the Boss, she discovered the actress Alyssa Milano. Then she decided to take her name because her captors wouldn't allow her to use her own. From now on, she would be Alyssa. Another one of her favorite series was Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, starring Jane Seymour. Ironically, it was thanks to that show that she learned about childbirth and baby rearing. They became her favorite series, providing vital lessons for her next life stage. On April 3rd, 94 Easter Sunday, the Garridos gave Jaycee prepared food for the first time and allowed her to watch other television channels. It was like a ceremony to inform her that she was pregnant. A short time before, Jaycee had understood by watching television that intimacy and conception were interrelated. By intimacy, I mean the abuses. She had her first daughter without anyone's help, and with only the knowledge that the small screen, the television, had provided her. Finally, she was born, and Jaycee named her Angel. For the first time in her new life, Jaycee didn't feel alone. She was mine, that's what she said, crying in 2011, to the famous journalist Diane Sawyer, who was interviewing her for her show on the ABC network. I felt that from then on I would never be alone again, were Jaycee's words. 3 years later, on November 13, 97, her second daughter was born, whom she named Starlet. On the other hand, during a time of Jaycee's captivity, Philip Garrido returned to prison for not respecting his parole, consuming substances. So, Nancy was left in charge of Jaycee, but at the same time she felt horrible jealousy of the young woman who had given her husband 2 children. To the perverse mind of Philip Garrido, he came up with something to calm Nancy's jealousy. That Jaycee would call her mom, and that Angel and Starlet would also pass as daughters of the marriage. While Jaycee was there, she never went to a doctor, never went to a dentist, and evidently her daughters never did either. And since the kidnapping, he had never allowed her to be in the garden in the sun. But since the birth of the little ones, Philip somewhat eased Jaycee's confinement. He abused her less, roofed the backyard of the house, and built higher fences so that the neighbors could not see them from the street and allowed them to walk around there. Stepping on the grass and being in the sun was wonderful. It was wonderful for the girls. Among the trash remains in that backyard of the house, she managed to plant some flowers and plants that in a certain way gave her peace. She also started teaching her daughters how to read and write. She did this as best she could with the little knowledge she had. Philip felt secure with the prison he had created for his family, so to speak. Over time, he gained more and more confidence. He even started to organize family outings outside of the house. Philip was convinced that no one could recognize Jaycee anymore, because she looked nothing like that widely circulated photo. In addition, the regime of fear had been effective on Jaycee. When Philip opened a small printing and photocopying business, he decided that Jaycee should be in charge of the graphic design of the cards and of the wedding invitations. He set up a telephone line, internet, and a computer to serve the customers. Jaycee would remember from those times that he was a click away from locating his mother, but he didn't have the courage to do it. The fear that the young woman felt was much more powerful than bars. On Monday, August 24, 2009, Philip Garrido, with his daughters Angel and Starlet, went to the campus of the University of California in Berkeley. They were going to distribute leaflets with religious messages. Garrido told the university's special events manager, Lisa Campbell, that he intended to hold an event on campus called the Desire of God, as his behavior seemed erratic and the girls too submissive and skittish. Lisa decided to play along. She took down his name and asked him to return the next day at 2 in the afternoon. She treated him very well because she wanted him to return for his appointment the next day. When Garrido left with the girls, Lisa immediately called the campus police, Allie Jacobs. Jacobs had this man investigated, and everything came out immediately. Garrido was an abuser who was on probation. The alarms that had gone off for Lisa had been accurate. She had done what the police could never do. The next day, August 25th, the trio showed up at the agreed time. This time, Lisa was with Allie. The little ones drew attention due to their extreme paleness. It was as if they had never been exposed to the sun. The one who is 15. He stood in a very peculiar way with his hands in front and looking up. The youngest, 11 years old, was staring at me with her blue eyes. She seemed to be probing my soul. It was disturbing, Ali confessed about what he felt that day. Trying not to draw Garrido's attention, they began to ask the girls superficial things. For example, which school they went to, what grade they were in. They just murmured answers. In fact, one said they were homeschooled. When the youngest was asked about a bruise over her eye, she replied that it was a birthmark. The adult women were frozen in shock. Garrido, meanwhile, continued his talk with that madness he had. He offered her a book he had written titled The Revelation About the Origin of Schizophrenia, and voluntarily he said that 33 years ago he had been a criminal, but that now he was working for God. Ali Jacob was evidently unsettled, and she called Garrido's parole officer. She told him that he was moving around with 2 minors, who he claimed were his daughters. The officer in charge of monitoring him said that Garrido had no children. And then, here's the question that arose for Ali. It was who was wrong. Ali Jacob's call prompted them to move quickly, to do what the police had never done before. So they were summoned to the police station the next day, to Philip Garrido, who, for his part, this man wasn't too worried. He felt he had everything under control. He went with Nancy, Jaycee, Angel, and Starlet. The agents started asking them their names. Intriguingly, Garrido himself discussed the minors' kidnapping. The bewildered police officers began to speak with each of them. When it was Jaycee's turn, she didn't claim to be Elisa as usual, but said her real name. Confused, the police officers asked her again, but she couldn't repeat it. She asked for paper and pencil and wrote Jaycee Dugard. Over the years, parole officers had visited Garrido's house 60 times, but they had never searched it. They had also never looked at his backyard, his shed, or the tents he had there. Despite a 911 call in 2006 from neighbors who claimed to have seen girls who were not part of the family in that garden. Had they been even moderately efficient, the officers would have found Jaycee many years earlier. But unfortunately, this did not happen. They were completely naive, not to mention useless, with a man who had proven to be a fearsome predator. Her family, despite Jaycee's fantasies that they had stopped looking for her, never gave up. They made clothes with her face, printed postage stamps, recorded hundreds of cassettes with the girl's favorite song. They wanted, in a way, to keep Jaycee's memory alive among the people to pressure the authorities to continue looking for her. Terry, in fact, collected money to pay private investigators, and even distributed up to 1 million posters throughout the country. Ever since her daughter disappeared, she lived in constant anguish and was startled by the sound of the phone. She feared both receiving bad news and the cruel jokes or the continuous disappointments she received. On Wednesday, August 26, 2009, everything changed. The phone rang once more at her house. When she heard the voice on the other side of the line, she angrily told them it wasn't funny and to please stop doing that. However, the woman's voice repeated, "Mom, it's me. I'm Jaycee." To the mother, her daughter was alive and now she had 2 granddaughters. This was a miracle. The reunion was intimate and very careful in a San Francisco hotel. Terry went with Shayna, his youngest daughter, and his sister Tina. Jaycee came with her 2 daughters. Terry brought a comb. She wanted to repeat that ritual that had been broken in '91 when Jaycee was 11 years old. They hugged, they kissed, and they talked a lot. Starting a new life was wonderful, but it was also an extremely difficult task. Little by little, Jaycee began to build new foundations for her and her daughters. On the other hand, the couple made up of Philip, who was 60 at the time, and Nancy, 56, were charged with kidnapping and abuse, and were indicted on 29 counts. They were held without the possibility of any bail. On June 2, 2011, Philip Garrido was sentenced to 431 years in prison, Nancy to 36, which personally seems very few to me. On the first decade of her release, in 2019, Jaycee said that her goal was to raise her daughters without falling into overprotection. The girls grew up thinking that Nancy and Philip were their parents. In fact, when Philip was imprisoned, they were desperate. Them knowing the full truth was a real challenge. Today, Jaycee is 41 years old. She is no longer the naive girl from that photo in which they asked for her appearance, because for 18 years she was brutally abused, nullified. Her identity was denied. She gave birth alone to 2 daughters, and she became an adult woman. In an interview, she maintained that she always thought she had to survive and remained positive. There's life after something so tragic. But what she can never imagine is the other life, the one that was taken from her. She will never know what her life would have been like without this sick man appearing. If you enjoyed this video, remember to follow me on my social media and secondary channel. You know, Keva and Pepe Mystery. My name is Pepe Tercero, and this is Pepe Mystery. Subscribe to the channel.